Okay, so I think it's just gone 8 o'clock. So I think we'll kick off tonight's WSA uh, webinar, Wednesday webinar. It's the Wednesday webinars are usually paid £10 a head, but occasionally we throw in a free one, which we've done tonight. The Making the Unseen Scene, and Louise will tell us a little bit more about that in a minute. But the WSA is really proud of its work that we do with in sort of the background with environmental NGOs. We made a commitment a couple of years ago to really focus everything we do back into the environments that we work and also holiday in. As part of that, last year we joined 1% for the Planet with business members. So 1% of our revenue, not profit, our revenue goes to two NGOs which we support. And this year it's Surfers Against Sewage and Save Our Rivers. So I'll put a little link in the email that'll go out tomorrow about those guys. In the news lately, we've seen some horrendous mess left by people on beaches, and more recently saw some pictures today of Loch Lomond and Trossachs Park. Pretty horrific. 2 weekends ago, I spent 3 hours with my wife and a friend of ours picking up 30 bags of litter off a beach, which were left there by the young people, shockingly and sadly. And most of that was single-use plastic and cider cans and water bottles. So it was quite frustrating, quite sad, really. So Louise will introduce herself in a minute, but just before that, Louise is going to give a short presentation. If you've got any questions you want to ask, please use the chat function, not the Q&A. It keeps things nice and simple for me, nice and easy. So anything you want to ask, and we'll always do our best to ask all the questions that people send in. So please just use the chat function, and we'll have a Q&A then towards the end. So so I'll hand you over now to Louise. I met Louise a couple of years ago on an expedition guide training course in Scotland. It was a great course, and certainly great to hear a lot about Louise during that course and the work that she's done afterwards. So over to you, Louise.
Great, thank you very much, Ben. So yeah, big thank you to WSA for asking me along to do this webinar this evening. I'm going to be sharing a bit of a story about my transatlantic sailing adventure that I went on last November. So I'll just get the presentation up, hopefully, and then we'll get going. There we go. Okay. So my name's Louise, and I'm actually a primary school teacher from Cornwall in the southwest of England. And last October, I joined eXXpedition to sail across the Atlantic as part of their round the world project that they are currently running. Now, when I'm not being a primary school teacher, I am a paddleboard instructor. As Ben said, I'm a WSA stand-up paddleboard instructor, and I spend most of my spare time on the beach in Marazion, just beside St Michael's Mount, which you can see in these pictures here, working with Ocean High Sup. And we've been running children's clubs for a couple of summers now. And within those clubs and those sessions, we always have a really big focus on the environment and the impact that we're having on the beach whilst we're there. We've run beach cleans, and we do lots of activities. So plastic pollution has always been something that has been really interesting to me, and something that I've really enjoyed working with young people to bring awareness to it and to start to find solutions to it as well. So alongside my work as a stand-up paddleboard instructor, when I've been working in a school as well, we've actually worked through the Surfers Against Sewage plastic-free schools scheme, which meant that all of the children were super involved in making sure that we reduced our single-use plastic within the school and came up with other solutions and ways around avoiding it as much as possible. So this whole adventure started about I suppose 2 years ago now, and I saw an advert. I saw this advert on a Facebook group, which said 2 years, 30 voyages, 300 women, 38,000 nautical miles. And the purpose of this journey was to research plastic pollution in all of the world's oceans. And I just thought it sounded like such a fantastic experience. But my sailing experience basically comes down to being on a reservoir when I was in about year 6 at some kind of school camp. So sailing wasn't high on my sort of skills list. Being by the ocean and being on the ocean on a paddleboard, absolutely fine, but sailing not so much. So I just kind of threw it to one side and thought, well, I'm not going to be able to do that. But in the way that Facebook works, this advert kept popping up over and over again. And I eventually thought, okay, well, I'll look into it a little bit more. And it turned out that the fact that I couldn't sail or didn't know how to sail at that point wasn't actually an issue, because they were more interested in gathering a variety of different women with many different skills and backgrounds to make a multidisciplinary team to go to the ocean, and then to be able to take the findings back to their various different settings around the world. And I'll talk a little bit more about the other crew members that I was on board with a bit later in the presentation. So anyway, I applied, I got through various different stages of the application process. And in October last year, I found myself in the Azores, a group of islands just off the coast of Portugal, with a group of women that I had never met before, about to set sail across the Atlantic. And just before we go into details of the voyage, there's some stats on our journey. So 2,274 nautical miles, 17 sunsets and sunrises, 14 of us on board the boat, over 30 different scientific studies, and varying amounts of wind whilst we were out at sea, many biscuits, and lots of other food as well. So whilst we were in the Azores, we did a variety of different outreach projects. So we went to the university, we spoke to some of the students who were studying marine biology, talked to them about their experiences of plastic pollution on the islands. We went and visited a recycling centre on the islands to see how they deal with their waste and the procedures that they go through. And we also carried out a number of different land-based projects as well. So this is an example here of it was called the Circularity Assessment Protocol. And basically all of the teams on eXXpedition will be carrying these out in their ports before they leave to go on their voyages. And this data is then going to be taken to the University of Georgia to be analysed. And it basically involved us going around, doing a litter pick around the town, and then looking at the cafes and shops that were surrounding that area to see if there was a correlation between the litter that we were finding and the shops that were selling different products. And all of this data is going to be collected up and then put together in a paper, as I said, from the University of Georgia. Now, we were a little bit unfortunate, I suppose, because we were due to leave the Azores, I think it was on the 24th of October, 25th of October. Unfortunately, there were 2 late season hurricanes that were coming across the Atlantic, heading right for the Azores. And Anna, our captain, was keeping an eye on these, and she basically said, there is no way we're leaving port at the moment. It's going to be really tough conditions out there, and I think we should wait for it to kind of go past us, which is what we did. So we ended up finding ourselves at a beach, doing a beach clean. Now, I do many beach cleans in Cornwall, and the one thing that I really noticed from this beach clean in the Azores was the similarities on the things that we were finding. So it was single-use plastics. It was single-use bottle tops, water bottles, polystyrene, ghost gear, fishing gear, and as you can see in the picture on the right-hand side, these little things called nurdles. Nurdles, if you've never heard of that term before, are the starting point of most plastic products. And they are usually shipped around in enormous shipping containers, which hold millions at a time. And often they find their way into the ocean and then washing up on beaches. Now, the issue with these is that they look very similar to fish eggs or other things that creatures in the ocean might eat, and therefore it then enters their food chain and eventually then enters our food chain as well. So despite my happy looking face in the middle picture there, it was quite a sobering experience to see that actually it wasn't just Cornish beaches that have all these issues with plastic, but you know, it's happening thousands of miles away as well. So another activity that we took part in whilst we were in the harbour was some sediment sampling. So this was one of the first scientific experiments that we were carrying out, and it basically was taking sediment from the bottom of the harbour, which will then be taken back to the University of Plymouth, which is one of the partner universities of eXXpedition. And then that sediment is going to be sampled and analysed to see the presence of microplastics. So what kind of microplastics are actually in the harbours themselves. So all of these activities took place on the Azores on land. And after 5 days of waiting around and checking the weather forecast and making sure that the boat was good to go, Anna finally checked out the weather and said, yeah, we're good. We've got a good window to leave tomorrow morning. So 6 o'clock in the morning, we were all up and ready to leave the harbour. Now, within not very many hours at all, this was the position that I kind of took in the boat. I was horrifically seasick. It was not a very pleasant experience. Thankfully, one I don't actually remember particularly well now. It seems to have been blocked out in my memory. But it was a really, really unpleasant time. And it lasted for about 48 hours. Of the 14 of us that were on board the boat, we had 3 professional sailing crew. And then we had Winnie, who was our scientist, our lead scientist. And then we had 10 guest crew who were similar to me. Now, some of those people had sailing experience. A number of us didn't have that much sailing experience. And so there was probably a good 8 or 9 of us out of the group who were experiencing quite bad seasickness. And strangely, it kind of brought us all together as a group, because those of us that were feeling sorry for ourselves felt sorry for ourselves together. And the others did an amazing job of looking after us and telling us, you know what, it's going to be okay. You've got to just ride out this first couple of days and you will then get better, we promise. Now, at the time, I didn't believe them at all. There was no way that I was ever going to get through it. And I was thinking I'd made a really horrible mistake. But thankfully, they did know best and they were right. And after a few days, my face looked a little bit more like this, a little bit happier. And to be honest, that smile didn't leave my face for the entire time we were at sea. It was just such an incredible experience. What I'm going to do now is talk a little bit about the scientific research that we did whilst on board, and then I'll talk a little bit about life on board in general. So this picture here is a good representation of what the ocean looked like when we were out at sea. Now, we were traveling from the Azores across the Atlantic to Antigua in the Caribbean. And our voyage was due to take us through the North Atlantic Gyre. Now, a gyre is an area of current accumulation. So it was expected that we would be finding significant levels of plastic because that was where the current brought it all together. Now, when we got out to sea, this was what the ocean looked like. It was absolutely beautiful, like the most incredible blue that I've ever seen. And not what I was expecting, because I'd seen, you know, in the media, these pictures of huge floating islands of plastic. And that was nowhere to be seen. This was what greeted us when you looked off the side of the boat. And we carried out two main experiments whilst we were on board. The first one being the picture on the left-hand side of the screen there, the manta trawl. Now this was a device that was thrown off over the side of the boat and then pulled along beside us. So it trawled through the surface of the water, collecting anything that was in the like in the surface level of the water. We would do that for 30 minutes at a time, and then it would be pulled out of the ocean and we would see what had been collected. Now, on the majority of occasions, there was bits of seaweed and such like, but the most difficult thing to kind of come to terms with was the amount of microplastics that we were finding in practically every sample. Now, in some samples, when we were actually in the North Atlantic Gyre, there was up to 100 pieces of microplastic in each sample that we took. And if you think of that in terms of the amount of water we were going through in 30 minutes, and just the surface level of the water, and then times that by the depth of the ocean and the sheer surface area of the ocean, it was overwhelming to think about the amount of microplastic which is out there. We also tried to find samples from subsurface water. So on the right hand side of the screen, you can see a picture of something called a Niskin bottle. This was lowered over the edge of the boat and then dropped to a distance of 25 meters below the surface. It would then take a water sample and we'd haul it back up on board. The water was then processed and filtered, and then the filter paper, which the water had gone through, was then collected. And that's all going to be going back to, again, the University of Plymouth, where they're going to be compiling all of this data. If you have a look at these pictures here, you can see in a little bit more detail what I was talking about. So the picture on the left-hand side of the screen shows an example of the microplastics that we were finding in practically every sample. In some samples, when we looked a little closer, we were finding that there was 7 times more microplastic than there were examples of fish eggs or marine life. So again, if you think about that in terms of the sheer size of the ocean, that's a very significant amount of microplastic. The second photo there shows one of the samples that we pulled from the manta trawl with a disposable plastic fork. Now this trawl in particular, I think, happened when we were about 1,000 miles away from land. So 1,000 miles away from land, in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean, you've got this example of human life, something that absolutely shouldn't be there. And when we actually found that, it was the first kind of significantly large piece of plastic that we'd found. And the fact that you could tell that it had come from something that humans use on a regular basis was quite difficult to kind of come to terms with, I think, even though we know that the sheer amount of single-use plastic is out there. The picture on the right-hand side shows us using something called an FTIR machine. So this machine allows you to discover the particular type of plastic that you found. So we would take the samples of the microplastic, put them under this machine, and then it would categorize the type of plastic, which will then go back to, when they collate all the data, being able to hopefully help to find solutions and knowing where this plastic in particular is coming from that's ending up in the ocean. So that's a little bit about the science and that took place whilst we were on board. And that was a significant part of our journey. We were doing that every single day whilst we were out at sea, as long as weather conditions permitted, which they did. The majority of the time we were very fortunate with the weather that we had. But it wasn't all about science. It was also about the experience of being out at sea and sailing and learning so much about being out on the ocean. And one of the most incredible parts of the journey was these other ladies that I got to experience it with. Now, I said that we had 3 professional crews. So we had Anna, who was from England. We had Maggie, who was our first mate from Australia, and Sophie, our deckhand, who was also from England. But in terms of the guest crew that were similar in my position, we had marine biologists from California, we had a lawyer from Austria, a sociologist from Latvia, we had a journalist from New York, a costume designer for the movies from Denmark, a PhD student from Malta. So there was a whole variety of different people on board, but we were all there with a collective aim of finding out more about this plastic in the ocean, and hopefully then taking it back to wherever we came from with a kind of fresh pair of eyes, and hopefully finding helping to find solutions for what was going on out there. Oh, and I think I missed out Winnie. Winnie was our science, she's the lead scientist for eXXpedition. She's a PhD scientist from the University of Plymouth, and she's going to be coordinating all of the data that comes back from all of these expeditions. So now we're going to take a little bit of a look inside the boat. So this was my bunk, and I'm not very tall, I'm about 5'5", and I was on the bottom bunk, and basically on a daily basis I would wake up and forget where I was and smack my head on the top of the bunk, and I never quite managed to get around not doing that. But despite that, this did become a kind of almost haven of your own space, because 14 of us on a 73-foot yacht meant that there wasn't a great deal of space to kind of call your own. So this very much became your own sanctuary of a place you could retreat and just kind of get some quiet time if it was needed. So this was our kitchen. Again, a very small space, and we were in different watch teams whilst we were on board. So we would take it in turns to cook a meal for the team. Breakfast was kind of a do-it-yourself affair, but then lunch and dinner was always catered for by the different watch teams. And I think I was making some kind of bean chili and potato dish here. Cooking for 14 people at once is quite a feat in itself, but cooking for 14 people in that small space where you have to have things to hold the pots on place on top of the cooker, and you have to brace yourself against the edge of everything to make sure you're not going to go flying across the kitchen as the boat rolls, is quite another challenge. Throwing into the mix that it was usually around, well over 30 degrees in there. It was quite an experience, but also one that I will never forget, and definitely something that I feel like I really learned from by being there. So the other thing that was a new experience to me was learning how to helm the boat. And obviously, you know, I spend a lot of time out on the water on my paddleboard, but there's a slight difference between a 14-foot paddleboard and a 73-foot yacht. But luckily we had the most incredible teachers on board. Anna and Maggie and Sophie were absolutely amazing. They were so patient and supportive and just absolutely brilliant that I never felt that I couldn't ask them questions. And it definitely kind of made me consider the way that I approach things from a teaching point of view when I'm in the classroom, but also when I'm instructing, when I'm on my paddleboard as well. So very, very grateful to them for the way in which they delivered all the information that I needed. So whilst we were out at sea, we saw some incredible wildlife. We saw dolphins almost on a daily basis, but it never became any less exciting. They were always a great source of joy to us all. Everyone always rushed up on deck with cameras trying to snap some pictures of them, or just enjoy the fact that they'd be swimming along beside us and having an amazing time. As we got further across the ocean, more towards the Caribbean, we saw thousands and thousands of flying fish. And these were probably my favorite thing to watch, because they're just so out of the ordinary and incredible to watch. We had a bit of an experience with one night. So we were on a night watch. It was about 2 in the morning. It was fairly dark, and I was sat next to my crewmate Yannicka up on deck. And all of a sudden she screamed and jumped up from where she was sitting. And as she jumped up, something landed on me. So I kind of jumped up as well. And at that point, this flying fish landed on the deck of the boat. And what had happened was this fish had jumped out of the water and actually hit Yannicka in the side of the head, which has caused her to scream and then her to jump up, which was quite funny. We then proceeded to spend the next 5 minutes chasing this fish around the deck, trying to catch it so we could throw it back into the ocean, which we did eventually. And hopefully we didn't scar it too much in terms of how it was feeling, because it was probably quite a shock to it, but a funny memory nonetheless. We were also very fortunate that when we were out at sea, we actually had a full moon at one point, or whilst we were crossing. And this meant that what we would experience was usually an incredible sunset, which I think I've got a picture of on the next slide, and then a few hours of darkness where we would see the most incredible stars, and then the moon would rise. And this is an example of just how incredible that full moon was in the middle of the ocean. It really made those night watches from midnight till 4 o'clock in the morning just pass that much more easily, being able to experience that kind of moonlight. And yeah, there's one of our incredible sunsets that we saw. They were different every single day, and I never got bored of looking at them. It was just such an awesome experience every single time. Really made me very grateful to be there and to be experiencing it. So that was kind of life at sea. We were sailing for 17 days, and we eventually became closer to land. We had a bit of a competition who was going to be first to spot land as we approached Antigua, and then we eventually arrived in at about 9 o'clock on Saturday, the 16th of November. We were moored up in the harbour, so not actually on a dock. So we had to spend the night out on the boat, which was absolutely fine. You know, it was our home. And then the next morning, we took the dinghy into land, and this was within sort of a few minutes of us arriving back on dry land, even though our feet are still wet. And what an incredible experience it was. Definitely one that I will never ever forget, and one that I hope I will be able to take the things that I've learned from it and pass on that kind of information and knowledge that I gained to schools and to people, as I'm doing this evening. I guess the thing that the main thing I want to highlight from it is what we can all do to be part of the solution to this plastic crisis. Now, as Ben said, you know, we've seen these horrible scenes since lockdown has started to ease, where people are just using more and more single-use plastics and not necessarily considering the way in which they're disposing of them. And I think, you know, the thing that we need to think about doing is stopping that plastic at the source. So if there is any other way that you can use other products, then trying to make those choices and making those decisions, and just doing everything that you can. It might feel that actually there's no point because you're one person, but you know, we want to make a stand and to show what's necessary to government and to industry, because ultimately it has to come from government and industry, but you know, as individuals we can make those choices and hopefully it will have some kind of influence. It is Plastic Free July at the moment. I don't know if anyone's been a part of that or seen any information about it on social media. There's lots out there, people suggesting different swaps that you can make and all that kind of thing to kind of have an impact and start to bring that into your day-to-day life. So it might be something that people want to have a look into if they're at all interested in it. But that's me, that's my presentation. I hope that it was enjoyable and that you got something from it. It's always a pleasure for me to be able to recount this experience just because it was so fantastic. So thank you very much for listening.
Thanks, Louise. That was really really informative, and what an amazing amazing adventure.
It was.
I think we've got a few questions coming in. I think the one, Plastic Free July at the moment, the one thing that shocked me the other day with the rubbish that we picked up was the amount of water bottles people are still using. It just seems absolutely shocking that, with all the education that's gone on, certainly with the age group that was on the beach the days before, that, still buying even tiny water bottles, from a supermarket shop, and not just, using water out the tap. It's
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, that's what I was saying about it coming back to industry and government. It needs to almost be a case that those things are completely banned, so that you don't even have a choice to buy them. Here in the UK, we don't need to be buying bottled water. We have, fantastic tap water most of the time. So yeah, I agree.
Yeah, that's great. So a couple of questions coming in then. So, what is the one thing or sight that will stay with you from your whole time at sea?
I think so. We had it was a night. I think it was about 3 or 4 nights before we arrived in Antigua, and we were up on the deck, and it was dark, so we were looking up at the stars, and all of a sudden we saw this really strange thing. It was basically about 50 bright lights moving across the sky in succession, all moving in exactly the same direction, exactly the same speeds. And we had absolutely no idea what it was. And, we'd been at sea for almost 2 weeks, and we started to kind of speculate over what on earth it could possibly have been. And we didn't really come up with anything, maybe some kind of satellite or whatever. But it turned out when we got to land, we researched it, and it turned out that Elon Musk had just launched his the stars satellite things. So we'd actually seen them as they'd launched, which was quite spectacular, also kind of spooky because we had no idea what it was. And we also, so that was kind of one thing, but the other thing would have been we had a minke whale that came alongside the boat at one point during the voyage, and stayed with us for a couple of hours, just swimming around the boat, and that was just incredible, absolutely amazing.
Sounds sounds amazing.
Yeah.
So what was the on all the trawls that you did, and the research as you were going along collecting that data, what was the sort of most bizarre thing that you found that you sort of taken aback by?
To be honest, I think it was probably the plastic fork that we found, just because that was kind of almost the biggest piece of plastic that we actually did find in the trawl, and the rest of it was all microplastic, so they were very, very small bits. So I think just the sheer size of that compared to the other things was quite overwhelming, and the fact that you could identify it as something that humans use on a very regular basis.
Yeah. So with the nurdles that you found, then what's sort of the opinion of like the life cycle in terms of from when they get into the ocean? Where do people think, is the research indicating where they're going, what's happening to them?
I think so. In terms of it seems that they come usually from 2 particular sources. So one being that they can be on shipping containers which come off into the oceans and then split, losing their contents. The other being that when factories are using them, that they haven't got procedures in place to necessarily clean up after themselves properly. So when they're cleaning the factories, there's just this kind of runoff of the nurdles, which then find their way into watercourses and then eventually to the oceans. I think that they seem to be more prevalent to actually find them washed up on beaches as opposed to finding them in the ocean, because the ones that we found were part of the beach clean. And I know that when we're in Marazion doing beach cleans, we find that, well, over the course of the couple of years that we've been running our kids clubs, we've collected probably tens of thousands of them. We make a bit of a game of it and kind of talk through with the kids what they are and that kind of thing, and then have a competition to see how many they can find. And yeah, tens of thousands of them. So they are a real problem. And I think that's again one that it's got to be the industry that's tackling it, as opposed to, you know, that's a very difficult one for the individual to do, because it's not possible to go to the beach and collect them all, because there's just so many of them around.
Yeah, it's again, it's so small, aren't they? Easily easily missed, I suppose.
Yeah,
The so question from Julie. Have you been able to use any of your experiences on the voyage in your day job?
yeah, absolutely. So since I've got back, I've been going around. I've been going to different schools and giving this presentation and talking through the process with them. Here in Cornwall, we've got a lot of schools that use that are part of Surfers Against Sewage. They do a lot with them, but it's been a chance for me to talk to these schools and maybe explain to them how they can be a part of the solution again. So just being out there and spreading the word so that people are, I guess, aware of what's out there that they can do to help.
Yeah. Question of another one about noodles. I mean, they're not just used for packing, are they? They're used for creation of plastic.
Yeah. So they're like the base product of what plastic items are made from. So they're taken, and then I think the process is that they're kind of melted and then shaped into whatever form they need to be. So it's more that it's not like, they're not like those sort of polystyrene peanut shaped things that you use for packaging. They're much smaller and made from a much more dense kind of plastic as well.
Yeah, it's quite on that topic. A lot of outdoor kit, whether it be waterproof jackets, fleeces, that type of thing, give off or release some plastic during washing. And I know Patagonia of doing a big study, I think, at the moment in regards to where that microplastic obviously ends back up into sewer and then eventually into the sea. One of the things that I haven't actually bought one yet, I know some friends use a guppy bag, so they put their clothes within the bag. Do you use those at all?
It's been one of the things actually that's been on my list to get hold of for a while, but for that very reason, that I know that there's all this research being done to show that, the plastics that are in our clothing are finding their way back into the oceans just from us using washing machines. So yeah, they do seem to be a really good bit of kit to have to kind of prevent that happening.
Yeah, and I guess when you clean that bag out then after washing, it'd probably be quite a reality of how much stuff actually the plastic is given back off.
Yeah, definitely.
So yeah,
definitely.
So on the trip then, what was the best thing you took with you?
Oh wow, that's a really good question. In terms of like practical items, it was probably just a baseball cap, because it was so hot at times that you just needed to kind of have some kind of shelter from the sun. But less practical, I suppose, probably was my journal, because it meant that I could record everything that was going on, and that's definitely been something that I've looked back on since I've arrived home, and actually helped me remember some stuff that had kind of already slipped to the back of my mind. So I think that will be something that I keep with me for a lifetime.
And would you go again, given the opportunity?
Absolutely. Yeah. If they said to me tomorrow, do you want to come and join another leg, I would be there in a heartbeat.
That's brilliant. Yeah. And what's happened to the boat during lockdown?
So they had quite an adventure with that, really, because when COVID kind of broke and global lockdown happened, they were actually on a leg sailing across the South Pacific, about to arrive in Tahiti. So the boat made it to Tahiti just in enough time that the majority of crew could get flights back to their home countries, but it was a bit touch and go at times, I think. Then Anna and Maggie, who were the skipper and first mate, ended up actually being on lockdown in Tahiti. I think they were locked down for about a month, so they were just living on the boat whilst it was docked. And as far as I'm aware, the boat has now been shipped or is being shipped back to the UK, and they've put the whole expedition on hold for a year. So they're going to restart, I think it's in May 2021, back in Tahiti, as far as I know. And then go from there, because obviously with weather windows and hurricane season and all that kind of thing, they couldn't just start again when COVID allowed it. It needs to be a much more detailed procedure. So they are going to be continuing, but there's a bit of a break for the moment, I believe.
Can't think of anything worse, being locked down on a boat in Tahiti.
I know, right?
Yeah. And was the boat, was it an round the world boat, a clipper, or?
It was, so it was a ketch, and it was actually used for I think it was army training. So they used to it had been all over the world, like you said. I'd done a lot of expeditions in the Arctic, I think. They'd used it for army training, but also they'd used it for, I think, like youth development projects. So they had a lot of young people that would go on board for a certain amount of time and do training and that kind of thing. So yeah, it's I think it's had quite a few adventures before it had even started on the one that we were doing.
Yeah, just a good sized boat to sail around the world on.
Yeah, definitely.
It's a question from David, and I think it's a really interesting one. I guess most people stand-up paddleboarders watching tonight, and I guess we're all, if not all, either learnt on or are paddling inflatable stand-up paddleboards. The material themselves, Hyperlon, or can't remember the name of the other one, with obviously drop stitch flooring in the middle, made out of plastic and plastic threads again. Do you think sort of the lifespan of an inflatable SUP when it's disposed of, or any opinion on using different materials or a particular brand maybe?
That's a great question. And I guess one that's very relevant, given that we're talking about the fact that, you were saying that we wash our clothes and elements of plastic can end up getting into water systems that way. And, we're using paddleboards on oceans and rivers, and they're made of plastic. I know that Starboard have a very sustainable and eco-friendly ethos within their brand. So they plant, they've been doing a lot of work, I think is it out in the Philippines, to plant mangroves and to make sure that they are kind of putting back into the environment. But in terms of other materials, that's a great question. I mean, that's one that I don't know the answer to, but perhaps one that I don't know if you know of any brands that are kind of looking into that. In terms of inflatables, I know that you can get solid boards that are bamboo and that kind of thing, which are perhaps better for the environment. But
yeah, I know sort of Starboard leading the way, or seem to be leading the way in terms of the sort of manufacturing chain. I think it's probably worth mentioning, if you ever come across B Corp, which is started in America again. WSA is just going through their B Corp process or certification process. It's been about 2 years' work. And that examines every single element of business. That's from who you bank with, what materials you use, where you shop, how you transport your trainers or clients around. And I think if you ever see that B Corp certification next to a stand-up paddleboard brand, then you'd certainly know that that's been through the mill, really, in terms of inspection and environmental awareness. one thing I watched on, I think it was Sunday night, Patagonia again, have just released a film from Chile on ghost gear. So for people who
Okay.
don't know about ghost gear, it's basically fishing tackle from anywhere, and trawlers that's just been cut away, and then it just sits in the ocean. Can be either just drifting around for years and years, caught in and amongst animals. You know, often see cases of whales or dolphins with in and amongst old nets, ghost gear. So the film is really worth watching. In Chile, they're recycling old net, and at the moment they're just bringing that into all their cap range. So all their caps are currently or going to be made out of this ghost gear. So you never know with materials. Maybe that'll spread into spread back into manufacturer standard paddleboards. Are certainly a lot being sold at the moment. That's for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. I think they their company that the Patagonia are working for, I think they're called Bureo, and they do a whole range. They've got skateboard decks and sunglasses as well that they make from the ghost gear. There's actually a company here in Cornwall called Waterhaul that have just started up a similar scheme. So they collect this fishing ghost gear from the Cornish coast, and then they've got a whole range of sunglasses which are pretty amazing. And they're doing a really good thing by putting that out there and putting all this plastic to good use. So yeah, definitely, there's definitely a lot of positive movements out there at the moment.
Yeah, great. So a couple of last questions. What was the difference in, I guess, consumer behaviour litter from the UK to the Azores to Antigua?
That's a good question. I mean, I think because of where, the circle that I kind of have in the UK, people that I spend time with, the children that I spend time with, whether it's in school or on the beach, have a really good sense of this single-use plastic issue, and therefore they're making changes towards it. In the Azores, I think I said that we went to this recycling plant, and they are recycling, but because they're a small island, they then have to have it shipped out, which causes them issues, and it's expensive, and all that kind of thing. So there definitely was an element that they were trying to work towards something positive, but it was difficult. In Antigua, I mean, again, it's a small island, but there was definitely a lot more presence of single-use plastic. Bottled water on the beaches there as well. It was prevalent in a different way to it is here in perhaps Cornwall, or what we saw in the Azores with broken up plastics. It was more a case of just complete bottles washing up on the beach, or just being left kind of littered. So I think that there was a huge kind of range of opinions from different people, and the way that then that finds itself into local communities, definitely. But then I guess that's the same. I mean, we saw here that a couple of weekends ago that was not the case here. People are still littering. So it's definitely a case of education and making people realize that they need to take more care, I suppose, and make a difference from an individual perspective.
I guess it's that for us as consumers, it's just stopping that, and maybe that'll drive or force the manufacturers to use a different a different container or material for packaging or whatever.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think if you look at any of the Surfers Against Sewage research, we share a lot of their stuff on our Instagram. I think Coca-Cola are the biggest offender, but it's well worth going into the Surfers Against Sewage site and following those guys. Okay, and then I guess last question is that whilst the boats come back, when will the full research? When would it have been published, and when are they going to do an interim report?
So there is already an interim report. So from the first, I forget exactly how many leggers it was, but from October until March when they got to Tahiti. So they went from Plymouth to Tahiti. They've already released an interim report on kind of their findings and some of the details from that trip. So before COVID happened, they were due to complete in, I think it was September 2021. And then the research would have been gathered in the time after that. So I guess now we're looking at probably, they're going to finish in 2022. So it will be the latter part of the year, then perhaps going into 2023, that the research will all be put together. I know that Winnie, who was the scientist that was on board with us, has been doing a lot of work to gather the information that's already been collected. But obviously, with still over sort of 18 months of journeying to go, they've still got a lot of data to collect and put together.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks. We always send out an email after each webinar. It'll go out this time tomorrow night, and we'll put as many links in as we can, and link back to the expedition as well. So and any of the reports that are in that.
Yeah, brilliant.
Okay, I think that sort of brings us off to the end of tonight. It's nearly 9 o'clock, so an hour. So thanks again, Louise. Great to see you again.
Yeah, and you likewise. Thank you very much. It was a pleasure.
Yeah. So just a few things to just to finish off. So we've got another Friday webinar, as we have done throughout lockdown. This Friday, it may be one of the last weekly ones. We might be going to every month now. And Friday nights is on PFDs, so buoyancy aids, and also leashes. So quite an interesting topic, following on from SUP safety 2 weeks ago. If you're really interested in this sort of subject, we've got an industry day and symposium in October, the 16th, 17th and 18th of October in Hayling Island. We're still planning on running it. We're focused on it being running. We've got one of the head speakers for the industry day is a guy called Chris Hines, who was one of the original directors who set up Surfers Against Sewage. He's done a lot of amazing work since then. He was the environmental consultant for the Eden project, totally changed their working practices there, and has done some phenomenal work around the globe since. So that's even though it's called an industry day, it's open to everyone to book onto. So yeah, I think that'll wrap up tonight. Thanks again, Louise. Thanks again for everyone for listening and your questions. Hope you found it useful and interesting, and hopefully we'll see you on Friday. So thanks very much, everyone. Cheerio. Bye now. Bye.